In the heart of a snowstorm, where no help should have reached, a trembling Persian kitten appeared on a desolate Alaskan road. Not lost, not wild, but purposeful. When Ranger Evelyn Ridge knelt beside her, she saw something strange. A hiker's emergency tag strapped to the kitten's neck. No words, no sound, just a soft paw and a pleading gaze. And that's how a silent creature led them into the forest, toward a boy lost beneath the snow, and a truth that would melt even the coldest winter. The wind howled like a creature in pain over the endless white that blanketed Crystal Pines, a remote township in the Alaskan wilderness where pine trees stood like frozen sentinels and roads became rivers of ice. Snow had fallen hard the night before, and the morning brought with it a blizzard's trailing breath, frigid, sharp, and cruel. Visibility was low, the sun only a pale smudge behind curtains of white. But Evelyn Ridge had work to do. At 37, Evelyn was a senior ranger assigned to the North Crystal sector. She was tall, lean, with the athletic build of someone who had long since traded comfort for necessity. Her auburn hair was always tied in a practical bun beneath her wool-lined ranger cap, and her cheeks, even in summer, held a soft, natural blush that the townspeople often said made her look like she belonged to the snow. She wore the standard ranger gear: forest green snow parka, reinforced pants, thermal boots, but somehow made it all look like armor. There was a quiet strength about Evelyn, the kind born from loss rather than bravado. 10 years ago, she had lost her younger sister, Lily, during a winter climbing expedition gone wrong. The grief didn't hollow her. It hardened her, made her precise, solitary, reliable. She no longer took risks, but she also never walked away when someone, or something, needed help. She lived alone in a wood-heated cabin at the edge of the park boundary, often taking extra patrol shifts just to stay moving. That morning, she was sweeping the East Hollow trailhead when she saw them. Tiny paw prints dotted across the snow-laced asphalt, barely visible beneath a crust of fresh powder. Not dog prints, too round, and not fox either. She crouched beside them, brushing away the powder with a gloved hand. A feline, her brow furrowed. No one owned cats this far out. The nearest community was 12 miles south, and even there, most people knew better than to let pets roam. Something about the tracks felt wrong. The spacing was erratic, the depth uneven. This was a small animal, disoriented, maybe injured. Evelyn rose slowly, scanning the line of pines that loomed just beyond the shoulder of the road. And then she saw it. Half hidden behind a drift, almost perfectly camouflaged in the snow, was a tiny creature, fluffy, delicate, trembling. A Persian kitten, maybe 4 months old, with a coat like whipped cream and eyes the color of glacier water. Its fur was tangled with ice, paws stiff with cold, but its gaze was alert. It didn't flee. It didn't hiss. It just stared at her. Evelyn felt her breath catch. She took a step forward, then another. The kitten flinched but didn't bolt. Instead, it made a small, breathy mew and moved closer to the edge of the road. "Hey, little one," Evelyn murmured, crouching again. Her voice, muffled by the scarf around her face, was still soothing. "What are you doing all the way out here?" The kitten stepped toward her, hesitated, then turned, slowly, deliberately, and walked a few paces away. Then it paused, looking back. Waited. Evelyn narrowed her eyes. She knew that look. She'd seen it before in search and rescue dogs, in the body language of trapped wildlife trying to signal something. This wasn't random. This kitten wasn't just lost. It was leading. She stood, heart tightening. Snow began to fall again, light but persistent. The kitten walked a few more steps, looked back once more, and mewed again. Evelyn glanced toward the direction it was heading. The old service trail, now closed for winter due to avalanche risk. She hesitated. Every ranger instinct said no. But something deeper, quieter, said yes. She keyed her radio. "Dispatch, this is Ridge. I'm on East Hollow, half a click from marker 12. Found an abandoned Persian kitten exhibiting odd behavior. I'm going to follow. We'll check in every 15. A crackle, then a reply. Copy that, Ridge. Stay safe." She adjusted her parka, tightened her scarf, and followed the kitten into the trees. As they moved deeper into the woods, the storm seemed to hush. The sound of their steps, one heavy, one feather-light, was muffled by layers of snow. The pines grew denser, their branches heavy with frost. Evelyn kept her eyes on the kitten, who navigated the landscape with surprising precision for something so small. It struck her then how strange it was that the animal showed no fear. It moved with purpose, like it knew where it was going. She thought of Lily again, her laughter, her stubborn optimism, how she used to say animals understood more than humans gave them credit for. Evelyn had never fully believed it. Until now. They came to a small clearing surrounded by old-growth pines, and the kitten stopped. Its ears twitched. Evelyn stopped too. Silence, except for the whisper of wind. Then in the snow, she saw them, larger footprints. Human. Faint, but unmistakable. Leading deeper into forbidden territory. The kitten mewed again, softer now, and turned slightly to face her, as if waiting. Evelyn stared at the tracks, then at the kitten. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's see where this goes." She took a breath and followed the prints. The trail had narrowed, flanked by thick pine trunks and sagging snow-laden branches. Evelyn's boots crunched through the icy underbrush as she kept her eyes on the Persian kitten ahead. The little creature, no larger than a snow-dusted boot, padded forward with unexpected certainty, pausing occasionally to make sure Evelyn was still following. The wind had calmed, replaced by an eerie stillness, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. About 15 minutes into their trek, the kitten suddenly stopped beneath a broken cedar tree, sat down in the snow, and began grooming its icy paws. Evelyn used the paws to kneel beside it, wiping her gloves against her pants before reaching toward the animal. The kitten didn't back away. Instead, it tilted its head slightly as she brushed aside the tangled fur beneath its neck. That's when she saw it. A collar. Not one you'd find at a pet store. This was made of sturdy nylon, weather-resistant, military-grade, the kind used by outdoor survivalists. Attached to it was a dull silver tag, scratched from wear, but still legible. Etched in simple block letters were the characters, Bryce, 1092. Evelyn's brows knitted together. The name Bryce meant nothing to her, but the number, it looked familiar, too structured to be random. She pulled out her encrypted Ranger radio and called it in. Northwatch Dispatch, this is Ranger Ridge. I found a Persian kitten with an ID tag marked Bryce, 1092. Any record on that code? A few seconds passed before a male voice responded, low and static-filled. Negative on that code, Ridge. Nothing in our lost pet or equipment registry. Repeat, no match. You sure it's a pet tag? Not a chance, she replied, eyes narrowing. This isn't standard pet gear. It's survivalist issue, durable, tactical. Copy. I'll elevate it to Northern Field HQ. You want backup? Evelyn glanced at the kitten, which was now standing again, facing north. Not yet. I think it's leading me somewhere. She clipped the radio back to her belt and sighed. Whatever this was, it had just become more complicated. As she stood to continue, her personal satellite phone buzzed inside her coat pocket. Very few people had this number. When she checked the caller ID, her heart twitched. Dean Carr. She hadn't spoken to Dean in nearly 4 years. He'd been a fellow ranger once, years back. Handsome in a disheveled way, with sun-worn skin and eyes that always looked like they were mid-laughter. After leaving the service, Dean had become a wildlife photographer, trading regulation for freedom. Evelyn remembered how it had ended. An argument over protocol during a joint rescue mission, followed by silence and distance. She hesitated, then answered. Dean, Ev, he said, his voice warm and surprised. I heard you're still up in Crystal. Figures. You never could leave the cold. She allowed herself a small smile. You didn't call to flirt. What's going on? Dean exhaled, static crackling. I've been tracking a wounded bald eagle for the last 2 days. Got a tip it was seen near Silverbone Ridge, flying low, erratic. That's inside your zone, right? She nodded, though he couldn't see her. Yeah, near East Hollow. I'm not far. Figured I'd check in. Thought maybe we could team up, old-time sake. Evelyn hesitated. The last time they'd worked together, it had ended with a frostbitten rescue and a fractured friendship. Still, I'm on something odd myself. Found a Persian kitten with a military-style tag. Code says Bryce 1092. There's a pause on the line. Then, that sounds like a survival beacon ID. I photographed a few of those collars during a rescue feature last year, usually issued to youth training camps. You think it belongs to someone? Maybe, Evelyn said. Either way, I think the cat wants me to follow it. Dean's tone changed. Where are you now? Half a mile into East Hollow Trail. I'm 20 out. I'll swing by. If you're walking into something dangerous, you shouldn't be alone. She didn't argue. Fine. I'll mark my path with flares. Look for red tags. The call ended. She pocketed the phone and looked down at the kitten, who mewed softly and continued forward. For another 10 minutes, they moved in silence, the only sounds being Evelyn's breath and the soft whisper of the kitten's movement through snow. Then she saw it, a small scrap of fabric caught in a tree branch. Blue nylon. Evelyn stopped, reached out, and carefully removed it. There was a partial imprint, half of a footprint, child-sized, pressed deep into the snow nearby. Her pulse quickened. She'd seen enough to know what this meant. There was someone out here, and they weren't walking. They were stumbling. Evelyn took a deep breath and pressed forward, boots crunching faster now. The kitten, sensing the urgency, trotted ahead, its tiny legs pushing through powder like a living compass. Behind her, a new set of tracks began to catch up. She turned just in time to see Dean Carr emerge from the tree lean, camera slung over one shoulder, snow-flecked beard, breath curling into the cold air. He looked a little older, a little more weathered, but still had that restless glint in his eyes. He wore a faded brown parka and fingerless gloves, and his boots bore the scuffs of someone who hadn't stopped moving in weeks. "Still don't wait for backup, do you?" he said with a grin. She shrugged. Some things never change. Dean's eyes landed on the kitten. "So that's the guide?" "Apparently." He knelt, holding his hand out. The kitten sniffed it, then moved back to Evelyn. Dean raised an eyebrow. "Well, she's got her favorite." They continued on, side by side, following the tracks deeper into the forest. The trees thinned slightly as they approached a narrow ravine. At the edge, they found something half buried in snow, a child's glove. Bright orange, soaked and stiff. Evelyn's breath caught. Dean gently picked it up, inspecting the inside. "Initials," he murmured, pointing to the faded black letters, BHW. "Bryce," Evelyn whispered. They looked at each other. "We need to move fast," she said. Dean nodded, all humor gone. "Let's find this kid." The kitten sat beside them, its tail wrapped tight around its body, eyes fixed on the ridge beyond. The snow deepened as the forest thickened, each step forward more of a challenge than the last. The Persian kitten, though delicate in appearance, pressed on with unwavering resolve, its small paws leaving light impressions in the powdery white. Evelyn Ridge followed close behind, her breath visible in short, disciplined exhales. Beside her, Dean Carr kept pace, his camera now slung behind his back, forgotten. They both moved quietly, the weight of the discovery, the child's glove, heavy between them. The trees grew darker and older the farther they went, ancient spruce and fir towering like watchful giants. Snow clung to every limb, muffling sound. Evelyn could barely hear the crunch of her own boots. The cold was no longer biting. It had settled into her bones like an old story, something she'd carried for years without knowing. "We're close to the avalanche zone," she said quietly. Dean nodded. "This whole area was marked off last fall after the early ice falls. It's unstable. Exactly why it's closed. No one should be here. No one but us," Dean added with a weak smile. They came to a ridge lined with warning signs, red flags flapping limply in the breeze and an old wooden barrier half buried under the snow. The kitten slipped easily under it without pause. Evelyn stopped, placing a gloved hand on the sign. "Danger. Icefall area. No entry." Dean studied her. "Still want to go in?" "She's leading us for a reason," Evelyn replied. "There's a child out here. We've already seen the signs." Dean's face sobered, the joking tone gone. "Then let's keep moving." They ducked under the barrier and entered the restricted zone. The trees here leaned at strange angles, roots pulled partially from the earth by shifting frost and gravity. Snow draped everything like silk, hiding the dangers beneath. It would have been beautiful, if not for the dread. Half an hour deeper, they reached a hollow where the snow looked wind-swept and smooth. The kitten paused again, this time circling a particular spot, mewing anxiously. Evelyn crouched and brushed away a patch of snow with her hands. She found it, a ski track, fresh, and next to it, a second child-sized footprint, partially collapsed from the snow, but clear enough. She rose quickly. There's someone out here. Recently. Dean scanned the surroundings. Look, over there. A strip of yellow fabric dangled from a pine branch about 7 feet off the ground. Evelyn walked over and gently pulled it down. It was part of a child's jacket, the kind you'd find in wilderness training camps, brightly colored for visibility, thermalined. She turned to Dean. Do you remember anything about a missing child report recently? He shook his head. Nothing official. But what? She pressed. Dean shifted, uneasy. 3 days ago, I was staking out the ravine trail for sunrise shots. Around dawn, I heard something strange. A high-pitched sound. It came and went like a whistle. Evelyn stared at him. You didn't report it? I thought it was wind. It echoed weirdly through the valley. I didn't think. You didn't want to get involved, she finished for him. Dean winced. Yeah. Evelyn's voice dropped. If someone's been out here since then, they might still be alive. A gust of wind blew, scattering snow across their boots. The kitten sat silently nearby, tail curled neatly around her legs, eyes watchful. Dean sighed, guilt painting his features. We have to find them. Together, they resumed their pace, this time quicker, more deliberate. The terrain shifted, steeper, rockier. They reached the edge of a slope where the snow looked disturbed, as if something, or someone, had slid down. Evelyn stepped forward to examine the marks. She knelt, running a hand over the shallow grooves. Sled marks, she whispered. No sled, though. Dean pointed to the trees below. Could have ended up down there. We need to be careful. If this is part of the icefall basin, it's unstable. He nodded. We roped down. They unpacked climbing harnesses from Evelyn's emergency kit. Hers was standard Ranger issue, black with reinforced carabiners. Dean's was older but functional, something patched and worn from years of freelance work. They secured lines around a thick birch and began their descent. About 20 feet down, Evelyn paused. Something glittered beneath a crust of snow. A metal whistle. She reached for it, brushing aside frost, and turned it over in her palm. Wilderness Program, Ridge Valley Camp. Emergency Beacon Number 4. Dean read it aloud, brows raised. That's a certified youth survival camp. Ridge Valley runs winter training for kids, teaches them solo skills. Bryce, 1092. Evelyn murmured. Could be one of theirs. Dean knelt beside her. They should have reported this. Not if they didn't know he was missing yet. As they moved farther down the ravine slope, the kitten, agile and sure-footed, leapt ahead, darting between icy rocks and exposed roots. Suddenly, she stopped at a low overhang where snow had piled unevenly against a rocky outcrop. Evelyn hurried forward and felt the air change. She crouched and pulled aside a layer of branches. Inside was a hollowed space. Not natural, a makeshift shelter. Pine boughs lined the walls, and in the far corner, a pack. A child's pack. No child. Dean checked the area quickly. Still warm, he muttered, his hand over the bedding. Whoever was here left less than an hour ago. Evelyn found a crumpled piece of paper, torn from a notebook. It held shaky handwriting. Nova went to find help. I have to wait. I'm cold, but I'll stay. Dad said help would come. Her heart clenched. She handed it to Dean. Nova, she repeated. Dean looked at the kitten. That's her name. Must be. Suddenly, a distant cry pierced the forest. Faint. Human. Both of them froze. Then Evelyn stood. Let's go. They moved fast, feet barely touching snow, hearts thudding. Nova raced ahead, no longer mewing but fully focused. The child was close. The cry faded into the hush of the trees, but Evelyn and Dean didn't hesitate. Their instincts kicked in, boots striking snow with urgency, hands brushing aside low-hanging branches. The Persian kitten, Nova, sprinted ahead through the pine-cloaked ravine, a dart of white fur cutting through the gray-white blur of the Alaskan forest. Her meows became louder, more insistent. The terrain dipped, the ground sloping downward in a jagged descent. Evelyn stopped short at the edge of a gaping fissure in the snow, a natural crevasse, narrow but deep. Fresh snow had partially concealed its edges, and it was pure chance they hadn't stepped into it. Dean arrived beside her, panting slightly. "That's a drop," he muttered, peering down. "Maybe 20, 30 feet. Nova had stopped at the edge, circling, mewing with rising distress. Her tail flicked anxiously, ears laid back. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. From below, muted by distance and snow, came another faint sound, a groan. "He's down there," she said. Dean dropped his gear and unstrapped his climbing harness without a word. Evelyn mirrored him. They secured their ropes to a thick pine at the ridge, tested the anchors, and began their descent into the crevasse. The cold intensified as they went lower, seeping into their gloves and collars. Snow clung to every surface, icy and wet. About halfway down, Evelyn spotted the outline of something unnaturally geometric, partially buried in snowdrift and frost, a small camping tent, crushed and torn, wedged between two ice-covered boulders. Its yellow nylon glinted faintly under the weak afternoon light. Dean was the first to reach it. He dropped to his knees beside the tent and called out, "Bryce? Bryce, can you hear me?" No answer. Evelyn landed moments later and crawled into the collapsed shelter. Inside was dim and frigid. A boy lay curled tightly in a sleeping bag that had been zipped up to his chin, one arm clutched around a sketchbook, the other wrapped around something flat, a photograph. His face was pale, lips tinged blue, and his breath came shallow and slow. Evelyn pressed 2 fingers to his neck. Faint pulse. He was alive. "Dean, he's breathing. We need to warm him slowly." Dean pulled out the emergency thermal blanket from his pack and wrapped it around the boy. Evelyn unzipped the sleeping bag just enough to adjust it, careful not to expose too much. She gently removed the photo from his hand. It was a family portrait, a man, a woman, and Bryce, all in matching winter jackets, smiling under the northern lights. The sketchbook, meanwhile, lay open to a page filled with careful pencil lines. Birds, trees, and over again, the same creature. A fluffy Persian kitten, always drawn with wide eyes and alert ears. "Nova." Dean leaned in. "He's been drawing her. She's not just a pet," Evelyn whispered. "She's his friend, maybe even his hope." Nova stood at the tent entrance now, silent for the first time, her gaze fixed on the boy. She stepped inside slowly, then curled up beside him, pressing her body gently against his side. A low, comforting purr rose from her chest. The warmth, small as it was, mattered. Evelyn activated her long-range beacon and radioed Northwatch. "Ranger Ridge. We've located the missing child. Coordinates locked. Request medevac at Ravine Base, approximate 2.2 miles northeast of East Hollow Trail. Subject alive, but hypothermic and unconscious. Over." Static, then a reply. "Copy that, Ridge. Airlift incoming. ETA 30 minutes. Hold position." Dean leaned against the icy wall. "We need to keep him conscious, if we can." Evelyn gently rubbed Bryce's arms through the blanket, her voice soft. "Bryce? It's okay. You're safe now. Nova found us. You did good." The boy stirred slightly. His lips moved without sound. Dean uncapped a small bottle of glucose solution from his kit, applying a few drops to Bryce's lips. Minutes ticked by like hours. Eventually, Bryce's eyes fluttered. His voice was hoarse, but audible. "Nova came back?" Evelyn smiled. "She did. She brought us to you." Tears welled in the boy's eyes. "I told her to go. I told her to find help. I didn't know if she would." "You were very brave," Dean said, his voice quiet. "You stayed calm. You survived." Bryce managed a shaky nod. "I drew her to remember. We saw," Evelyn said. "You're a talented artist." He gave a faint smile, and then his eyes closed again, but this time with a kind of peacefulness. Nova remained at his side, purring like a metronome. Above them, the distant thrum of rotor blades began to echo through the ravine. The rotor wash from the rescue helicopter blasted snow in every direction, whiting out the world for a moment. Evelyn shielded her face with one arm as the chopper descended into the ravine, skids crunching down just yards from where she knelt beside Bryce. Nova, ever composed for such a small creature, didn't flinch. She stayed tucked at Bryce's side, tail flicking softly, as if anchoring him to life itself. The paramedics were quick, two figures in red and gray gear, faceless behind mirrored goggles. One was tall and broad-shouldered, the other shorter with the brisk, no-nonsense energy of someone used to the edge of emergencies. Evelyn offered them a clip summary, while Dean assisted in preparing Bryce for the stretcher. The boy had slipped back into a light sleep, his breath more regular, his cheeks warming beneath layers of insulation and hope. As they loaded Bryce onto the stretcher, Nova tried to follow, a plaintive meow escaping her throat. One of the paramedics gently blocked her path. "She's with him," Evelyn said firmly. "She doesn't leave his side." The shorter medic paused, then gave a nod. "All right, let's make room." Nova was placed beside Bryce, nestled against his chest. The team secured them both and lifted the stretcher into the hovering bird. Evelyn stepped back, heart thudding as she watched the helicopter lift off and disappear into the white sky. Only then did she feel the sting of tears. Dean stood beside her in silence, watching the spot where the helicopter vanished. "He said she'd come back," Evelyn whispered. "He trusted her more than most people trust other humans." Dean nodded slowly. It wasn't just trust. It was training. Intent. That kid believed in her with every ounce of his being. They began hiking back through the ravine, the adrenaline fading, replaced by exhaustion. Evelyn found herself scanning the snow absent-mindedly, her mind still half with Bryce. Dean broke the silence. "I'm circling back tomorrow. There's something I need to find." She looked at him. "What?" "The eagle," he said simply. It took her a moment to remember. "You think it's still alive?" "I think I know where it is. When we were climbing down, I spotted a break in the tree line near the northern bluff. Some kind of trap was glinting in the sun." They parted ways at the trailhead. Evelyn returned to Crystal Pines HQ to file the report, her words barely adequate for what she'd just experienced. That night, she stood alone on her porch, staring at the snow-covered woods that had nearly taken a child's life and given it back. The next morning, true to his word, Dean returned to the ravine. The cold had sharpened overnight, the trees brittle with frost. The snow glistened like glass. He followed the slope they had descended, but veered off toward the bluff, navigating through thick brush and ice-heavy branches. And then he found it. A bald eagle, majestic even in distress, lay at the base of a split pine. Its wings were partially spread, one clearly injured. Around one talon was tangled wire, old snare trap, rusted and illegal. The eagle's golden eyes flicked toward him but didn't move. Dean approached carefully, murmuring reassurances. He crouched, removed his outer coat, and slowly covered the bird. After years as a ranger and later a documentarian, he had handled enough wildlife to know calm hands and steady breath made all the difference. He freed the trap, inspected the wound. No break, just deep abrasion, and carefully bundled the bird in his coat. For a moment, as he stood with the creature cradled in his arms, he felt something shift in him. Awe, responsibility, connection. He named the Eagle Warden. 3 hours later, he delivered Warden to the Crystal Pines Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, a modest facility run by a silver-haired woman named Gail Mercer. Gail had once been a veterinarian in Anchorage before retreating to the woods to devote her final decades to animal recovery. Stern, capable, and kind in the way of mountain people, Gail took one look at the eagle and nodded. "We'll get him flying again," she promised. Dean stayed to help. Over the following days, as Bryce recovered in the regional hospital and Nova stayed curled up beside him like a silent nurse, Dean worked in the rehab center, cleaning stalls, prepping meals, learning to listen again, not to podcasts or radio static, but to wings, to breathing, to wind. Evelyn visited the center a few days later, bundled in her green parka, cheeks pink from wind, a thermos of coffee in hand. She found Dean leaning against the eagle enclosure, watching Warden flex his mending wing. "Not every wild thing wants to hurt you," Dean said without turning. "Some just want to go home," she replied, stepping beside him. They stood in silence for a long moment. Dean broke it first. "You cried when Bryce left." Evelyn didn't deny it. That cat wasn't just a trail lead. She was his lifeline. He looked at her. "And maybe yours too." She chuckled dryly. "You always were better at reading animals than people." Dean shrugged. "They're easier. Fewer lies." Evelyn watched the eagle preen its feathers. "You gonna keep him?" Dean shook his head. "He belongs to the sky. I just borrowed him for a bit." As she sipped her coffee, she thought about Nova and Bryce, thought about that moment in the snow when Hope had worn a fur coat and blue eyes. She'd spent so many years believing the wild was only something to endure or patrol, but perhaps, just perhaps, it was also something that could guide. The first signs of spring in Crystal Pines were subtle. A lessening of the wind's bite. The way the icicles hanging from cabin eaves began to drip steadily at noon. Birds returned, sparrows, mostly, flitting between the snow-laden pine branches, tentative yet hopeful. Evelyn Ridge stood at her porch railing, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee, and watched the forest stir awake beneath its lingering winter blanket. It had been 2 weeks since Bryce had been rescued. 2 weeks since Nova had become more than just a cat, more than a companion. She had become a legend. The story of a Persian kitten leading a rescue through a snowstorm had traveled faster than wildfire across Alaska. Local news picked it up first, then national outlets. There were interviews, phone calls from journalists, offers for books and documentaries. Evelyn declined most of them. She didn't need the noise. But she said yes to one thing. Nova stayed. The kitten, now a little stronger, her coat brushed daily, her paws healed, had taken up permanent residence in Evelyn's cabin. She explored with cautious curiosity, sleeping in odd places like the open boot tray or the folded wool blanket on the back of Evelyn's couch. But most often, she sat by the window, watching the woods. Evelyn, once someone who avoided permanent attachments, found herself buying cat toys, learning about grooming brushes, researching high-protein feline diets. It surprised her how quickly she made space. One afternoon, Bryce and his family visited. His parents, Kendra and Mark Whitmore, were kind, middle-aged wilderness instructors who had raised their son with a blend of independence and deep affection. Kendra had sharp cheekbones, sun-lined skin, and a calm presence, while Mark had a lumbering warmth to him, the kind of man who always offered to fix a leaky sink even when no one asked. Bryce, still pale, but laughing more, clutched Nova the moment he saw her. "I told you she'd come back," he said, stroking her fur. "She always knows where home is." Evelyn smiled. "Seems she does." They stayed for lunch, a hearty stew Evelyn had learned from her grandmother. Mark brought homemade bread, and Kendra a jar of preserved blueberries. It was the first time in years that Evelyn had shared a table with people who weren't in uniform, people who spoke not of patrols or reports, but gardens, spring melt, and plans for summer hikes. Later, as they packed up to leave, Bryce handed Evelyn a small leather notebook. "I made something for you." Inside were sketches, his drawings, of Nova, of the ravine, of Evelyn with her scarf and snow goggles. On the final page was a scene of the cabin, smoke curling from the chimney, Nova at the window. Evelyn's throat tightened. "Thank you, Bryce. I'll keep this close." That evening, she visited the town hall, where a modest crowd had gathered under banners strung with pine garlands. Dean's exhibit, Eyes in the Wild, opened with 30 printed photographs mounted on rustic wooden frames, capturing the subtle and stunning of Alaskan wildlife. He stood near the front, dressed in his usual rugged coat, camera still slung across his chest like a second heart. He smiled when he saw her. "You came," he said. "I said I would." The photos were arranged in narrative form. A fox slipping through dusk, a caribou crossing a frozen stream, a bald eagle mid-flight, Warden, unmistakable, wings outstretched and healed. And at the center, Nova, in the snow, staring into the camera, eyes wide and unknowable. Dean raised funds through the event for a new outreach program. search training, and wilderness education for rural children. The initiative, named the Nova Trail, would teach young people survival skills with the help of trained animals and experienced rangers. We've already had 10 families sign up, Dean told her. First sessions in June. Evelyn nodded, proud but quiet. The work was just beginning. That night, when she returned home, Nova was waiting by the door. Snow had begun to fall again. Not in angry gusts, but a gentle hush, soft flakes settling like whispered thoughts. Evelyn placed Bryce's notebook on the shelf beside the radio. Then, without a word, she sat by the window where Nova had curled up. The kitten stirred slightly, blinked, and stretched one paw to rest against Evelyn's leg. Outside, the forest stood silent. But in Nova's golden eyes, wide open to the falling night, there was something more, something ancient, something forgiving. A reminder that even the coldest winters end. That even in the fiercest wilds, there is room for loyalty, for love, for spring. Sometimes the smallest voices lead us through the fiercest storms. Nova wasn't just a kitten. She was a whisper of hope, a flicker of faith, a reminder that love doesn't always roar. Sometimes it purrs. In a world that often feels cold and uncertain, may we all be like Nova, brave, loyal, and quietly powerful. And may we also be like Evelyn, willing to follow, willing to believe, and willing to make room for miracles in unexpected forms. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Leave a comment below and type Amen if you believe every soul, no matter how small, has a purpose. Subscribe to stay with us for more true stories of love, survival, and the sacred bond between people and animals. May God bless you, and may the warmth of spring find you, even in the heart of winter.